I feel like that I don't know who I know to get both of you guys on this call or what I like, what strings I had to pull, but to get city councilman of Alexandria and to get, I think the most dynamic judge in Fairfax County on the line, like at the same daggone time, like that is phenomenal. How you guys doing?
Doing good. Doing good,
very
man.
well. Very well.
Awesome.
So I would suggest it has a lot to do with you being who you are, because it only
Indeed.
took a couple of text messages. So
That's it.
Oh man.
When Alan hits you up, you don't say no.
Hey, I'm gonna let you tell my kids that, John. So when we get them in here, we're going, and any other realtors that I'm trying to get a deal through, I'm gonna let you tell them that too. So I'm gonna let you guys introduce yourself real quick, and then we'll get to the heavy lifting. Dante, you want to start?
Sure. I'll keep it brief. Dante Bug. I'm a sitting circuit court judge in Fairfax County, the 19th Judicial Circuit of the Commonwealth of Virginia. I've been serving since March of 2019. Out here in Fairfax, we have 15 circuit court judges. I am the junior member of the bench, last name or first name from the bottom of the letterhead, if you will. Prior to taking the bench, I was in private practice for approximately 11 years, doing primarily criminal defense, domestic relations, and a small amount of personal injury cases. Originally from Newport News, Virginia, went to the University of Maryland for undergrad, where I ran track, and University of Richmond for law school. And that's it.
757.
Yes, sir.
All right. Mr. Chapman.
I'm Alexandria City Councilman John Taylor Chapman, third term council member, born and raised in the city of Alexandria. Primary focus on council has been business and economic development, as well as housing and education. Knowing that all three of those kind of make a very strong community here in Alexandria. And as we improve on the opportunity that businesses have, as well as the education of our residents, we know that there will be a much greater, stronger community in Alexandria.
That's awesome. John, I got a question.
Yep.
What is systemic? What does that mean?
Well, systemic means it is kind of built in to the systems that we have in our country or in our city. It means that many times it means that change doesn't happen overnight. Change has to be a process that breaks down the processes and procedures of a certain thing or area. I know we're going to talk about a number of those things. One thing could be education. Changes in education don't come overnight. They come by a lot of hard work over a decent amount of time by groups of individuals. So things that are systemic are deeply woven into the fabric of our communities.
Can you give me an example? And I'm off the cuff conversation. So any question, guys, any question you feel like you shouldn't answer, just tell me. It's cool.
Okay.
So can you give me an example of something systemic? Let's say in the city of Alexandria.
Yeah.
Let's say maybe like housing or schooling. Like what does that look like?
Schools is the easy one. And looking at like school budgets, for example. One thing that any county, whether it's Alexandria City or Fairfax County, can try to do is give out money as equally as possible to every school and every school neighborhood, and they try to do that. Most school boards do. The thing that they cannot change is the economic dynamics of many of those communities that they're giving schools to, and that has a very deep impact on that school. So, for instance, one of the challenges that our local school systems have is that they might give money equally to every school, but the PTAs and the parents of that area are going to have a lot of economic say-so about what happens at that school. So for instance, if you have a PTA in a wealthy neighborhood can raise a lot more money than it can in a poor neighborhood. And that's going to have an impact on after-school programs and the quality of those after-school programs that are run by the PTA. It's going to have an effect on some of the fundraising that happens that goes toward that school. I think most of us are familiar with kind of fundraising programs that happen within the schools. And if you have a more well-to-do community, they're going to have a lot more success with that type of fundraising. And that's going to have an impact on the schools and what additional stuff that can be done through the schools and the teachers. And so some of that is very systematic. It's not something that changes overnight. It's something that, school boards have to work very hard to try to separate out and equal out around the county or the city.
Mr. Bug, were there any barriers to you getting on the bench, barriers or challenges that people just, maybe someone that didn't look like you, maybe didn't have to face?
Well, I think one of the first barriers is, whether right or wrong, when you think of judge, you don't normally think of a 38-year-old Black man. And the first time I ran was for General District Court out here in Fairfax, and that was 2015, and I was 35 years old. So, and the way the procedure operates, at least in Fairfax, is you have to go through rounds of a vetting process with the bar organizations, the county bar, the specialty bar organizations, and then members of the Fairfax Bar Association will vote as well. So my primary office is in Arlington. I had to overcome that thought that he's an Arlington attorney. He may be a great judge, but we'll wait till he gets some more experience and kind of stick with what we typically see from a judge, as somebody that's been in practice 20, 25, 30 years, someone that's been around for quite a while, has established connections in certain places. So the biggest thing was just being kind of that outlier, being the younger person, being in most of the candidacies I was in, I was the only minority candidate, with the exception of the last go around. So those things are, it's like John was saying, it's not necessarily, I won't say it's systematic, but it's just the way that the system has operated that you kind of stand out. And I think there are some pluses and some minuses to that, because you have to kind of eat away at that. For as an individual candidate, for me, I think it was important to show, even though I had, at the time prior to taking a bench, I had not been practicing for 20 years, I was able to show that in an 11-year time span, for any lack of anything else, I had hustled and amassed quite a bit of experience. So those things like that, I think, were the biggest barriers, not having any kind of connections, if you will, in a political forum or things of that nature too.
Yeah, I think all of us are on this phone. I think I would call us outliers. And sometimes as an outlier, you got to realize that your journey to where you are is very different than someone else that looks like you, their journey from where they are.
Yeah.
So there are levels to it. I'm blessed that we all went to college, we all graduated, we all had great, opportunities for that most people who look like us just don't have, right? So it's always a balance between, all right, I think that when I step into the room, I'm the baddest, because I've always had to step into rooms where I've had to prove myself, right? And sometimes when you step onto that basketball court and you got to prove yourself, when you step onto other basketball courts, it's not a big issue. It's not a big deal.
That's right.
But when we're starting to make decisions, we're not just making decisions based off of who we are. We're making decisions off of so many more people that may be cousins, that may be, people who just don't have the advantages or haven't had the support system that we've had around us. Mm-hmm. Tell me this, Dante, does diversity matter in the judicial system? Does it really matter?
I'm but one view, and I would suggest to you that it does. And I think it matters drastically, because our judicial system is only as good as the faith that the community puts into it, okay? And Fairfax County, Northern Virginia, none of these geographic areas are homogenous. We are in a very, very diverse community, whether you're talking about Arlington, Fairfax, Prince William, what have you. And I think it's important for the judicial system, not just the judiciary, but prosecutors, defense attorneys, civil attorneys, for there to be diversity at all levels. The legal profession, I think, in and of itself needs more diversity. It will be better served by more diversity, just because of, like what you said, those experiences, even if it's not my own personal experience, the things that I was subjected to or saw growing up, personal experiences of friends, things that happened to me or someone else I know, may be vastly different than what, say, one of my colleagues who was perhaps born in Vietnam or immigrated over to the United States at a different age, or someone that was born in Fairfax and lived in Fairfax their entire life. There's differing perspectives. And one thing I can tell you that I know I learned very, very quickly, especially in this line of work, is no two cases are the same. You can never really be asleep at the wheel, especially when you're talking about sitting as a judge, because you can have a wrongful death case, you can have a criminal case, you can have a personal injury case, but those cases are they're going to be so fact specific. And a lot of times what drives the day is understanding how people think, how people operate. Why would, if somebody said something to somebody else, would that justify that person, perhaps how they responded or why they didn't comply with certain rules or regulations? So diversity plays an important part of that. Diversity plays an important part in terms of how the system operates and what the folks or the community sees from the system. You know, if you're starting to see, if you come into a courtroom and you still see, you only see one thing, you start to believe, whether right or wrong, you know, and this is from my experience doing criminal defense. I've represented a lot of juveniles, and I represented a lot of young Black and Hispanic juveniles. And I remember vividly having jury trials where the potential jury members are coming in, and, you know, a jury on a criminal case is going to be 12 people, but you start with a panel of 40 to 50. And I remember clients sitting there saying, well, there's no Black people, or there's no Hispanic people. Well, when do the rest of the folks come in? But that's something that, because our jury panels are selected from the registered voters of whatever community, that's what you see in the system. So I think it's very, very important, not just the judicial system, not just judges, prosecutors, people actually doing their civic duty to serve on jury duty. You know, a lot of people don't want to serve on jury duty. You hear some amazing excuses. Everybody is completely busy when it's time for jury duty. They have business travel lined up. They're the only person in their business. But I think if we could address that, we would address some of these other issues that we see when we have these high profile cases and folks, it hits the news and folks are like, well, how did the jury do that? You know, I think we need to have some diversity across the board in the system, or otherwise we're not really going to be able to achieve our maximum potential when it comes to the judiciary.
True. Hey, John, I want you to follow up on that question. What can be done in your eyes to increase diversity in the judicial system?
In the judicial system, I think for elected officials, we know that we have our General Assembly members have the opportunity to select judges. One of the things in having a diverse, not only pool of applicants, but also diverse members of the General Assembly, is that they will look to appoint a much more diverse bench across our communities, especially those communities that have a higher population when it comes to people of color. You know, I see that, and I think we're starting to see that trend happen in many of the urban areas in Virginia, whether it be Tidewater, Richmond, or Northern Virginia. And I think that's what is going to help continue to push diversity forward. I'm going to have residents here in Alexandria that are not going to be accepting of the fact that our delegation in the General Assembly chooses judges and individuals that don't look like our community or don't have a makeup in our local bench of that community. I think that's key to making sure elected officials know that they need to be appointing a diverse group of individuals and be looking at the individuals that have been on the bench a long time. I know there's a current conversation right now about, I believe, Judge in Richmond and some of his prior thoughts and feelings about certain subjects prior to him being on the bench. Those conversations are going to come out and we're going to have a discussion about kind of the current values of our community and how those align up with those of the judiciary.
What were your barriers getting to where you are?
For elected office, I think they're same for a lot of individuals of color. One of the biggest barriers is usually money. You know, you don't have individuals that come from, you know, communities of color that kind of walk into the political sphere knowing how to raise money, knowing how to raise a lot of money, and having some of those kind of genuine networks of individuals that are going to give them money. That's one. I think that you always have, depending on where you're coming from, you always have to learn. You have to learn the system, learn the individuals and the stakeholders that are going to be impactful in getting you elected, and also giving you advice and their thoughts and feelings as you look to govern. You know, so I would say making sure you have a kind of quality network can be also a hindrance, or if you don't, that could be a hindrance to you not only running and winning an election, but also governing and having a true understanding of the community that you represent. But I would say with any candidate, most candidates are going to point to money first, because money is sometimes a decider of elections because of how you use it and how much you're able to raise and then use for your the interest of getting out your message.
What are, John, if you had to highlight one or two things that, over the next 2 or 3 years that, if you could wave a magic wand and focus on things that could change systemically in the political arena, what are the things that people really need to be paying attention to? Because I think sometimes, we get caught up in this like big idea of like protesting and making people aware. But being aware and doing work are two different things. And I think you are uniquely positioned to really like educate people on like, all right, like for me, I know in housing, I need to educate people more on real estate and how racism has played a part in the past and how it affects it now. That's my lane. I understand it. I've been there. But there are not a lot of people who are even, just for the same reason people don't give a lot of money to a candidate, is the same reason that they're not educated about a candidate. So I would love for you to kind of highlight and unpack if some young activists are out there who really like are poli-sci majors, like what are the things that they need to be focusing on?
So I would say the first focus for all of us is kind of what does our local budget look like for our local governments? We need to know where that money is going. And understand what the priorities of that local government is. And so how much money is going to education? Is it enough? How much money is going to our law enforcement? The conversations around defund the police have some backing because, when you look at police budgets, particularly in the city of Alexandria, you have an opportunity to cut some of that budget, but not cut the services. I mean, the services in law enforcement and public safety. How much does that actually cost? How much do we need to spend on that? And as a philosophical matter, is it better to spend money cleaning up the problem versus getting ahead of the problem and trying to solve it before it becomes a problem? And I think I'll give you a quick example. Fairfax County, almost a decade and a half ago, had a major gang problem. And I think this was kind of during the rise of MS-13 and some of those gangs. And they were starting to cause issues in Fairfax County. And so Fairfax County got ahead of the issue by trying to use some of the money that they had for public safety and taking that money and turning it into middle school after school programs at every middle school in Fairfax County. That started to decrease the numbers of children that were home alone between the hours of 3 and 6, when a lot of that recruiting would happen. Those kids instead would be in a school with adults learning and growing, and not home alone or with a possibility for gang activity. And so they saw their numbers decrease. And so, looking at opportunities with our local law enforcement budgets to be proactive instead of reactive, I think is key. As we look at issues with social services, same thing. How can we be proactive with supports and services versus having to wait until individuals come to us seeing a need? I think that's the biggest change that young activists and people that are kind of fighting on the ground now are wanting to hear from local officials, state officials, and federal officials. It shouldn't be all reactionary. It should be being proactive, knowing what those issues are, whether if it's homelessness and housing. You've seen, as some of us have seen, all of our local jurisdictions set new goals for housing in the recent times, and saying, hey, we know that housing is going to be an issue. It's an issue right now, and it's going to be an issue into the next couple of decades. How can we reset our goals as local communities to start as we know what those housing issues are going to be? How can we start to not only take advantage of opportunities, but also set higher goals and push a little bit harder to accomplish them? I think, again, proactivity versus being reactionary, I think is the key.
That's dope. That's dope. Really good. Dante, what should members of the public do to educate themselves on the judicial system? I think there are a lot of people out there that just don't know how important the judicial system is to your everyday life and all the things that we're seeing, on the news. A lot of people are looking here, but there's a whole nother component here that's judicial. And I think the more we educate people on, the system, the better we can understand it, and the better we can, we can correct some things that may need to be corrected. Like, how do they go about doing that?
I would say the easiest way to educate yourself is first the understanding that the justice system is for the people. With the exception of juvenile court involving cases of juveniles under a certain age, all of our courtrooms are open to the public. I always tell people or suggest folks, especially on a Friday, go to your local courthouse and just sit and watch. Sit in traffic court, sit in a sentencing docket, sit on a civil motions docket. Because all of the issues that are going on in your county, in your local community, they're coming before the court. Most times what I think one of the biggest issues is, and again, this goes back to my experience in private practice, a lot of folks just don't know anything about the judicial system or justice system until they're in it or family members in it. And at that point, usually it's too late. Usually at that point, you're either the defendant, you're trying to sue somebody, or you have a custody or visitation matter going on. And in that moment, you're so focused on your outcome. You're so focused on, this is one of, if not the biggest issue going on in my life right now. And I just really want my lawyer or this judge to give me what I want, quite frankly. I think it's very, very important for folks to educate themselves on the front end. And you see this a lot across the nation where we have these high profile cases, it makes the news, and then there are a news report that the grand jury did not indict or a prosecutor did not take charges to a grand jury. And the response of what you see on social media in terms of people thinking that, not understanding the difference between a grand jury and an actual sitting jury on a case, or what role the prosecutor plays in that, or what role, quite frankly, the grand jury plays in the judicial system. The courts are open. Unless it's a specific case that is not open to the public, that is the easiest way to educate yourself. There's obviously online resources, but if you go and watch, like today I had a civil motions docket that ran all the way from 9 a.m. to 3:30. But on that docket, there were a number of issues, whether it be wrongful death cases, dealing with what the building code, whether or not the Virginia maintenance code applies to a 26-story building if a child falls out of that window, things that you really wouldn't care to pay attention to or really think to pay attention to, are the easiest way to educate yourself is to go to your local courthouse, watch, and sit and watch. I think that goes hand in hand with the second part of any kind of improvements or quality assurance, if you will, for the judicial system. Like any other job, right? Judges, it's a job, it's a profession, it's a public service job. Folks tend to, and I'm not saying this to suggest that if folks don't come to court, justice is not going to be served. But I think there's a difference when people know that the community is watching. There's a difference when people know that these decisions that they're making, or if something as simple as their decorum in the courtroom is being monitored by the general public, because we're all evaluated. We have judicial performance evaluations, and a part of that goes to jurors that come in and serve, or members of the courthouse community. But I think it would make a big difference in the education of the general public for people to just show up in court. Don't wait until it's a big monumental case and you're only kind of getting one or two sides of it. Go to a courthouse, sit, and just absorb what's going on.
Yeah. I think one of the other things that I really thought about was understanding your rights, right? I think many people don't understand their rights until their rights are either violated or they're in question, right? So, really just making sure that you have a clear understanding of like, what are your rights? If you get pulled over, like, what do you have the right to do? And not just at a surface level, but at a like deep level. Like really genuinely understanding. I think, the laws were written for a reason, and they're written for you to read them and understand them. And, I think, the better you understand them, the better you can position yourself if you ever got into a situation where your rights were called into question.
And again, the resources are there, the information's there. It's a matter of people taking the active step to do it. I mean, if you continue to scroll your Instagram account, perhaps if you follow some different lawyers, you may get some good advice from those folks. But most courthouses in Northern Virginia have a law library that's open to the public. You're going to find in there resources that attorneys use. We call them CLE materials or treatises that will break down a specific area of law, real estate, wills and trusts, estate, criminal defense. And it kind of gives you a step-by-step of, if you were a practicing attorney, these are the things you need to be mindful of. These are the black letter law. You can find that information in your local courthouse, and it doesn't take much other than the initiative to actually want to do it.
That's right. That's right. John, where are the opportunities? Where, if you could wave a magic wand going into, let's say, going into elections, we know that let's not skirt around it. Like, this year is a big year when it comes to politics in the
Right.
world, right? If you can wave a magic wand and like even out some of the playing fields and fix some things that you personally feel like need to be changed, what would those things be?
So that's a big question. From a systematic standpoint, in terms of kind of campaigning, I think it's one of the biggest things that I see is the uneven access to candidates. The higher you get, and frankly, any level of election, certain communities don't have as much access to a candidate as others. I think we already talked about kind of funding, and sometimes funding connects up with that access, which is unfortunate and unfair many times, because communities of color that might not have the access to dollars to give to a candidate might have some of the biggest kind of systematic issues that need to be addressed. And so for those individuals not to have access to that elected official to talk policy, to get educated about how they can empower themselves, to not have individuals that are running for office kind of cater to them and be able to explain policy to them and bring new policies forward, I think is probably one of the biggest injustices in our system. In regarding issues, straight out issues, for our region, housing is one of those biggest issues. How do we systematically make sure that all communities have an opportunity for housing, funding for housing, opportunity for where housing is placed? We are still working off of, many jurisdictions, frankly, are working off of a 1950s and 60s kind of era planning processes, where they have a lot of redlining in certain areas and certain housing types are not allowed. One of the biggest conversations right now is around density. And where do you put that density, and how do you put that, and how does that hopefully change and equal out the playing field? If you look at what I think Minneapolis did recently, and is that they they banned single family zoning in order to kind of create density wherever they choose to in the city. That's a powerful, strong move. I mean, if you think of communities in Alexandria, Fairfax County, and Prince William, we have a lot of single family neighborhoods that are single family zoned. And what that does is that creates more demand, that kind of squeezes demand. Because you have single family zoning, you have less multifamily zoning, and there are a number of people, especially young people, that are coming out of school, finding their first jobs, and then not being able to find any place that's affordable. And they're not expecting to get, $1 million house for $5, but they are looking to find something that can be affordable on their first salary, and that's a challenge for our area. And a lot of that has to do with zoning and where we put stuff.
Yeah. Dante, real quick, what kind of systems are in place to ensure the selection of diverse judges? Are there systems in place, if any?
I am muted. Still learning all this stuff.
I got you.
Across the state, it varies, and I can only really speak to how the procedure operates in Northern Virginia. The vetting process has a significant portion that involves the minority or specialty bar association. So one of the things that you're going to do for somebody that's running for an open judgeship in Fairfax County, you're going to interview and be evaluated by the Fairfax County Bar Association. That's the primary bar association. You're going to have a vote of all of the members of the Fairfax County Bar Association. It's kind of a, highly qualified, qualified, not qualified, and you have your rankings there. But additionally, the specialty and minority bars, so the Northern Virginia Black Attorneys Association, the Hispanic Bar, the Asian American Pacific Attorneys Association, as well as the Virginia Women's Attorneys Association, they all do their own individual vetting process as well. And a lot of other jurisdictions have that. Northern Virginia, I think, is unique, where most of our, and when I say Northern Virginia, I'm referring to Arlington, Alexandria, Prince William, Fairfax, Loudoun. Most of our jurisdictions have that, so that at least those minority and specialty groups at least have a say, and that's their evaluations are submitted to the legislators for each particular delegation that make those selections. You also have some other community organizations that have started to get involved now, the NAACP and other, the Black Chamber of Commerce, other minority groups that realize that there's room for improvement, if you will, when it comes to diversity. So the overall qualifications as it relates to the state, or what you have to be appointed to a judgeship, don't really address race or anything. You just have to be a member of the Virginia Bar for at least 5 years. You don't even have to actually be a practicing member for that 5-year time, and be in good standing. So quite frankly, anyone that fits that category can be. But as we're actually playing out and judges are selected, the specialty bars have their say. Community members also have an opportunity, because once you're selected by the local delegation, you still have to go before the Courts of Justice Committee down in Richmond. That's an open to the public. If there are folks that have objections to a certain judge and want to express support of a particular judge, they can come down to Richmond as well to do that. So you have a lot of opportunity for it there. I'm not so sure if the general public or the community is aware that that is how the process operates, because in other states, you have judges that are, I have some friends that are attorneys in Atlanta, and down there, I believe their judges are popular elections. So they have to go out and campaign. So I think the community has a better idea that, okay, we're voting for mayor, we're voting for city council, we're also voting for judge, and these are the candidates for judge. And you don't see that in Virginia just because of how our judges are selected.
I got John. Who selects judges genuinely? Is it people like you? Is it who does it? Congressman?
So it's our state delegates and state senators. They have processes within the General Assembly to select the various levels of judges.
Interesting. So that's a conversation that someone could have with their elected official about, like, who, what type of judges are you looking at? Like, just
absolutely. And I think one of the things that we've noticed locally is, what are our state officials, when I say state officials, I mean those delegates, those state senators, what are they doing to let the public know that this is a process that's out there, that these processes are ongoing? So for instance, when Judge Bugg was selected, what were the delegates in Fairfax County and that area what were they doing to let the public know that, this was an ongoing process? These are the individuals that are coming forward from our community to be judges. Is that out open in public? We've had some questions locally in Alexandria about some of the transparency, per se, of those processes, because we want our public to know what's going on as it relates to the judicial system. And this is a great way to educate people what that process is and who are the types of individuals that are coming, that are upstanding individuals, wanting to be selected to be judges. And many times we find out much of the public does not know that process.
But Dante, you got anything to add to that?
No, John hit it right on the head. The only other thing from a procedural standpoint, which I had neglected to add, is ultimately we are appointed by the governor. For district court, you're appointed for juvenile and domestic relations court, and general district court is for a 6-year term, or circuit court is for an 8-year term, and Court of Appeals and Supreme Court are 8-year terms as well. So there is still the opportunity, even though it's rare, for someone to be selected by the General Assembly, but perhaps not approved by the governor. There are procedures in place for the governor to make appointments if the General Assembly is unable to select someone. We had that this past session. There's an open seat that's still pending on the Court of Appeals. So it's a very, and even me as a practicing attorney, until I kind of had that nugget that there was the potential there for me to serve in this capacity, I wasn't fully versed in that because, as a practicing attorney, you show up and you deal with the judge that you have in front of you. So I think there's a lot of room for education for folks to know, because whether, politicians obviously take into consideration the thoughts and desires of their constituents. And that's a way that people can have an impact on what the judiciary looks like, even if it's not a popular election like some other states.
Gotcha. All right, we got a couple follow-up questions, and I'm gonna let you guys go to get to your Friday happy hour, because that's where I'm going, to the Friday happy hour at my house.
Yeah, if I don't mind, go ahead and filtering those questions that came in from the Facebook group.
Yeah,
Hi, everybody.
Yeah, you want to ask those questions, Crystal?
Yep, I'll ask those questions for the panel. So yes, I can. This is Crystal here. So our first question came up. It says, when it comes to rewriting policies, what are damaging our communities? What do you suggest is the first few steps? Or could you outline from start to finish and how this could happen? So when it comes to rewriting policies, what are damaging our communities? What do you suggest is the first few steps? Or could you outline from start to finish how this could happen?
I can take that if that's all.
Yeah.
All right.
That's one I'd prefer not to answer.
Okay. So, I think the first step is first and foremost, educating yourself on that policy. What are the pros and cons of that policy, so that you can start to talk to elected officials and other community members about that policy and educate them. I think that's the first step. So next, kind of to outline it from start to finish, you educate yourself, and then you start to organize. Members in the community, stakeholder groups within the community, around this issue of this policy that is troubling to the community, shall we say. Once you've organized yourself, I think you approach elected officials with not only to have them work on the policy, but to bring them ideas and what your expectations are of changes to that policy. So if you are organized as a group and you say, hey, we want to see policy A changed in this way, we're going to bring it to local elected officials or officials that can make that change, and start to lobby them, sometimes working with them to change that policy, sometimes pushing them to change that policy regardless if they want to or not. You really, if you're able to bring forward some good changes and a strong base of support, I think those things will really work in your favor in trying to get those policies changed. For example, you're going to have, I think in Fairfax County you have, in Alexandria you have individual community members as well as some groups working on some criminal justice reform policies. They've been working with their groups, building up community support, and they started to take some of their ideas to local elected officials to get their input, support for these changes.
That's good. Next question. When it comes to education, how do we figure out how to allocate funds in a certain school district so that all communities in the district receive the same proper education? And that's actually really cool. I think it's an important question. The reason why I think that's an important question, John, is because now that we're going virtual, right now, I think there's so many things that are getting exposed from like economic, and income gaps that are going to directly affect the level of education that certain kids are going to get. So what are things that we need to be thinking about, to kind of, level out that?
I think, at the core of some of this is really our involvement and our ability to organize. Regardless of the issue, I think those two things really need to happen. So parents need to be talking to other parents and being able to organize their thoughts and their feeling so that they can approach school board members and other elected officials about funding, about policy, about procedure, because you are going to have kind of the gambit of issues that come up, whether it's Wi-Fi access and access to laptop computers, issues of childcare, and the ability for parents to be at home working with a kid virtually versus having to go to work. Issues of transportation are going to come up now because of how are kids going to get to school, If their parents can't take them, are they going to be able to take the buses? Are the buses going to be overcrowded and then unsafe? What does that look like? And of course, you've got issues of funding. I think first and foremost, most local jurisdictions are looking at a decrease in revenue. So as we continue to be in the pandemic, how does that kind of work its way down to our local school systems? I know most local school systems probably have had to take a revenue cut as well. And so that then means that they have less money going to probably very critical places, such as teachers, such as classroom safety now. And along with a cut in revenue, you're going to have some larger expenses. As it comes to classroom safety, you're going to be expecting our schools to be operating in a safe manner. That means a whole lot of cleaning because kids are very active and very busy with their hands. And so there's going to be a lot more cleaning that's going to have to be done. And so you're probably going to have a lot more custodians that are putting in a lot more time and using a lot more equipment to make sure our schools not only are clean, but stay clean. And so looking at our budgets is hugely important. As we have groups that have systematically had kind of better access and better understanding of our local budgets, it is really incumbent on all of us, particularly those individuals in those communities of color, to try to be empowered. If we believe that we already have that access, we need to be working to empower those other folks who don't have access, because it's going to be a challenge for us to provide education equally, especially in the face of this pandemic with so many more of those issues exposed.
Yeah, my last question.
Funding for them. Go ahead.
No, my last question, I'm going to ask you both of these before I let you go. Same question. It's funny. For our mentoring program, I've already reached out to the principal and asked them, like, where are the gaps that we can help you fill? Is it laptops? Is it,
Right.
iPads? Like, there's so many. How many of us have computers that we just, they still work, but like we can start donating them, and are we rallying these companies that really want to do something for the community to like really do something practical, like get some Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi for people, like literally like fill in those basic gaps that, can really level out the playing field. Because what I feel is if you put someone who's been behind at the same playing field as someone who's there, like they're going to find a way. They've been finding a way their whole life from down here. You give them that opportunity. Right. It's just something, something in the underdog that, they end up shining and just being everything that God wants them to be. So last question for both of you. Where do we go from here? In less than 1 minute, I want you guys both to answer that question. Where do we go from here?
I'll be honest with you. I think you put the timer on me. I think our communities come out much more educated, much more cohesive, because I think folks know that there are challenges out there, and it's only by working together can we get through some of those challenges. Working together means, I've got to reach down to folks at a lower economic level and make sure they are doing okay, make sure they are having the opportunity to be empowered. If it's folks of a different color or background, I think we're seeing that we have to come together to make sure that all of us get ahead or none of us can.
Powerful. What about you, Dante?
I would say, and the only reason I'll address this because I just saw it come up on the side on the webinar chat. Someone asked a question of how do I think my experience growing up in Newport News shaped my willingness to work with the community that I currently live in. I think it made it so I don't have an option to not work in the community that I live in, because I think there is a false sense of some of the societal ills that we see on TV and in the media, perhaps because of the affluence that you generally see in Fairfax County, that those problems don't exist here. There's not a need for mentoring of young Black and brown students. There's not a need for people to see diversity when you come from such a diverse place. So growing up in Newport News, especially in an underserved portion of the city, I know that you can't look at one portion and suspect that everything else is fine elsewhere. So that would lead me into kind of answering that last question of where do we go from here. I think it's to continue to pay attention. I think whether it's been the pandemic, whether it's been the move towards social justice, all of the things that are going on now, I think probably more so than any other time at least in this country, more people are paying attention. And a lot of people are paying attention that perhaps had that false sense of security. It doesn't impact me. These things are not as important as they used to be. Life's fine. Everybody's, living in a cohesive unit. And what we are starting to see through social media, through the television media, is that that's not the case. And I think it's very important for people to pay attention. I harbor back to what I said as it relates to the judicial system, for folks to pay attention before we get the big notarized cases and the big, the cases that achieve a lot of media attention. Go sit in and pay attention to what's going on a daily basis in your county, in your community. And it'll be a real eye opener. And I think that would probably lead to some of the stuff that John was talking about. And again, whether it's judiciary or funding or anything, I think our communities are better served the more people we have active and engaged. It goes back to that social contract that we're all going to play a part to make sure that we all can have a life that we can enjoy here.
We did sign a social contract, didn't we?
We did.
I think we all signed a social contract.
Absolutely.
And where do we go from here? From my point of view, fellas, is, I think we need to hold each other responsible for doing what you can. I mean, I've had people who've come and they've used us for our services based off the fact that we support our community. I think there is a certain level of economic responsibility that you have to put with your dollar, and you have to put with the people that are around you, and saying, look, all right, great, I'm giving you this dollar, but what are you doing with that dollar? Are you feeding the homeless? It doesn't necessarily, social doesn't mean just Black, right? There can be like, they're poor economic, they're poor communities, there's housing. There are a lot of people that are affected by social injustices. It just so happens that we're talking about Black right now. But I guarantee if you go out there and you find, a program or something that you're passionate about for someone who's not living the same life as you, and you hold these businesses responsible and these people that you're doing business with responsible for having that type of heart, it's going to change the world. Right. It's going to change the world. And, we are in a very unique opportunity. The reason why I wanted to bring this forum together is so we could just continue the conversation. And just get a little bit smarter about the way we're doing this thing. Okay. So
thank you.
I'm probably going to have you guys on sometime again, if you guys are open to it.
Okay.
I think people got a lot out of it, but I appreciate both of you and your time and your energy and everything you guys do behind the scenes that I know about, that a lot of people don't know about. I appreciate you guys. John, are you running for
city council next year? Next year, 21.
So can people get some information about how to get a little bit more information about you? Where?
Of course. We've got John Taylor Chapman for Alexandria City Council on Facebook. Join that Facebook group or like it. We will be putting up our year-end email newsletter probably in about a week. Just wrapping up what we did over the last city council session. And so you'll have an opportunity to sign up for that email. We usually don't put out too many email blasts, but we do try to keep you up to date with what we're doing on city council. So you can sign up there.
Awesome. I appreciate both of you guys. Thank you.
Thank you for the invite. Thank you for setting this.
Absolutely.
Oh man, I appreciate you guys. All right. Have a good weekend. All right.
All right. You too. Thank you.
All
right.